we are going to be making an absolutely delicious and super easy dessert. We are making chocolate lava cakes. So by the end of this video, you're going to know how to use a double boiler. You're going to have a really quick and easy dessert that you can keep in your back pocket whenever you need to whip something out. And you're also going to know how to keep things from sticking to your pans. This recipe in particular, it's really important that nothing sticks, otherwise you won't have something very good to present. So without further ado, let's get started. Step number one, we need to preheat our ovens. We're preheating to 450 tonight, so get that started so you don't forget. The next step is we want to prep our double boiler. Now, double boilers are one of those things that sound far more complicated than they are. It's a pot. I'll show you a visual. It's a little pot that we put water into. Not much, you just need a tiny bit. I usually measure it using the first knuckle of my finger, and I want about half the depth of my finger. So I put it into the water, use my thumb to mark it, and I've got a little over, you can see the water dripping off, a little over half that knuckle of water. That's perfect. We don't need much. So it's a pot with a tiny bit of water in the bottom, and we put a bowl on top. And we heat up this water to simmering, and we make sure there's a big gap between the water and the bowl on top. This bowl should not be deep enough that it touches your water. And the reason is, when the water boils, it's at a very specific temperature. The steam is then released, and that steam is what heats the bowl. Technically, water can get to higher than 212 degrees, which is boiling. So the steam cannot, though. The steam is limited in how hot it can really get once it's released from the boiling water. So having these separate gives us a form of temperature control. Really, what it does is it allows us to melt things like butter and chocolate without burning them. We have a little more control over the reaction, and you're not going to have something that is going to burn in like 10 seconds of too much time, like if you use a microwave. So double boiler is a pan, a little water in the bottom, bring it up to a simmer. The steam and the heat coming off of that water is what heats this bowl, and then this bowl is what we use for melting our chocolate and our butter. So I just want these two things to get started, because measuring out the ingredients is fast. The rest of this is going to go real quick. So go ahead and get your double boiler started right now. I've got mine just on medium heat, so that heats up fairly quick, but it doesn't get too crazy. If you have the bowl on top already, it means it's going to heat up a little bit quicker because it's going to trap more of that heat. All right, now that those really early prep steps are getting ready for us, we can move on to the next steps. Let's go through the recipe. So this recipe calls for 8 tablespoons of butter. Use unsalted butter. 6 ounces of dark chocolate. We need 4 6 to 8 ounce Ramekins. If you don't have Ramekins, you can use your muffin tin, and then you're going to want to prep 6 of the little spots in your muffin tin instead of using the Ramekins. You want 4 eggs, so you want 2 full eggs and then 2 egg yolks, and I'll show you how to separate the yolk from the egg in just a minute. 1/4 cup sugar, which we got over here in the corner. Just a tiny pinch of salt, and 2 tablespoons of flour, and then we do have a little bit of cocoa powder. That's so that we can keep things from sticking to our ramekins, and it's also so that we can kind of clean up the presentation at the end. It's a little dusting technique. So first thing we need to do is actually prep our ramekins. Okay, so what we do with these ramekins is we use a little bit of butter, we coat the inside, and then we dust the inside with cocoa powder. The easiest way I've found for dusting these is to use a little T-ball strainer, especially these little spring-loaded ones. You can scoop up some of your cocoa powder and then just dust it into there. So we dust it, and then we tap out any excess cocoa powder so that there aren't big like dust clouds on the inside that we run into later. So we're going to butter it first. Just get enough butter in there so you can go back with your fingers and get all the corners. And this dessert is really great, partially because it's not a super sweet dessert, so you can pair it with a lot of other stuff. You could do whipped cream on top. Often you'll see folks with a scoop of ice cream on top, or a little caramel sauce. Even just some fresh fruit or berries go really well on top, and it's not like a sickly sweet dessert. So this was an extra chunk of butter that I grabbed, so I'm just going to set that aside. And then we just go back on these little ramekins and make sure you really get these corners down here, the corners are where things really end up sticking. So make sure you've really got the corners and the bottom, because what we're going to do is we're going to bake our chocolate lava cakes in these ramekins. But then when we get them out, we have to invert the whole ramekin. And if anything's sticking, if the top here is sticking, if the corner's sticking, and the sides are sticking, your lava cake's going to tear. And because the inside of these are still liquidy, that's why they're chocolate lava cakes, it looks like chocolate lava, then your presentation is going to get screwed up because it might tear into the center, and then you don't have that beautiful lava flow that you're aiming for in your chocolate lava cake. Okay, corners are well taken care of, sides are done. Boom, those are all buttered. I'm going to take this pan over here so I make a little less mess on the counter when I do this. We're also going to use this pan later for when we're baking. So when these go in the oven, we're going to put them in the oven with this pan so that it's just easier to control everything. There's less chance of anything tilting on the racks weird, and just easier to manage the whole process. So I'm just scooping some cocoa powder here. And you'll be able to see how easy this is. Right? You can even just tap this a little bit. Now often folks will do this with flour, but because this is a chocolate lava cake, we want it to be very chocolatey and rich, I'm using cocoa powder, which does the same exact thing as a flour. So there's a little excess here. I'm just tapping into the next one, and we're going to tap these out in a minute anyway because it's pretty dense with cocoa powder still. You can tap this around a little bit, make sure you get really good coverage. I tapped this one around, and you can see how even the bottom is coated. I didn't tap this one, it's a little splotchy. Sounds like our oven is preheated. If your water is already boiling at this point, drop the temp down to low. We just need this to simmer. But now you've got your 4 prepared ramekins. They're really nicely, smoothly coated. These are 8-ounce ramekins, so I'm only going to really be pouring up to a little under this line up here. So the fact that the top up here doesn't have powder is just fine. If you're using a 6-ounce ramekin, you're probably going to be filling up to the line though. And so you want to make sure that you're all the way up to that line. Set these aside, throw these back on the pan, and then just set these out of the way. We're going to need them a little bit later once everything else is whipped up and ready. So next up, we're going to be using our double boiler, which just finished and is ready for us, to melt our chocolate and our butter. So we've got 6 ounces of dark chocolate here. You want this to be 60% plus dark chocolate. You'll get a much better flavor out of that. You'll get a more chocolatey flavor rather than a sweet flavor. And a really important point on the type of chocolate you get. These are baking wafers. These are designed specifically for baking and melting. They melt really well. Chocolate chips are a no-no here. Chocolate chips have some extra stuff added to them, some coatings that keep them this really beautiful shape, but that keeps them from melting appropriately. So you either want baking chips like this, or you want like whole bars of chocolate. So you would want something like this, or there's a bunch of brands. It'll say baking on it, so it's a baking chocolate. Chocolate chips will they'll kind of melt, but they'll never really give you the texture you want. They'll still be kind of solid later, so your lava cake won't actually flow when you cut it. It'll just kind of sit there, and it might even be a little bit lumpy. So just make sure with your chocolate you're using baking chocolate. Now we've got a stick of butter here that's about 8 tablespoons. You can take a look at, you can see how low the flame is on this. Nice little screech. You can barely even see the flame, keeping it pretty low. There's still steam coming out, so this is plenty warm. I'm going to dump my butter in first. Make sure it's got good contact with the bowl. Then I'm going to take my chocolate and pour that in as well. And we're just going to let this get started while we then get everything else going. But you can see how quickly all this melts. So we're going to get all this melted. Remember, the bowl's going to be hot. It's hot enough to melt these things. So if you have to grab the bowl to keep it stable, use a towel or a pot holder. We're melting this, which is actually very similar to a ganache. And because a ganache is basically just heavy cream and chocolate and maybe a little bit of butter. This is just lacking heavy cream. We're melting this, and then we'll whisk it up a little bit later to add to our other ingredients, the egg and the sugar and whatnot. So I'm going to keep checking on this every couple minutes, but this is already going pretty quick. Actually, maybe I'll just stay here. Let's do that. The smaller your chunks of butter, the faster they'll melt. It's good if your butter is room temperature already, too, so that it doesn't take as long to melt up. In baking in general, unless a recipe specifically calls out that your butter should be warm, or cold rather, you basically always want your butter room temperature. And that's basically the case for all baking ingredients. If you're using heavy creams or anything like that, you almost always want them at room temperature when you're baking. Some exceptions are things like when you make whipped cream. You want all of your ingredients and your bowl and the whisk to be as cold as possible. So when you're making whipped cream, you actually end up putting your bowl and your whisk in the freezer for 20-30 minutes at least before you start making your whipped cream. Well, that's a very specific example. No, every recipe worth its weight will tell you make sure you're using very cold ingredients for that case. Everywhere else, you want room temperature. You don't want a rolling boil here. That's too much heat. Okay, we can take this off now. There'll be enough residual heat for those tiny, tiny lumps of butter to melt on their own, and then we'll just make sure we whisk everything before we're done later. I want to show you how to separate the yolk of an egg from the rest of an egg. This is something that is actually really easy, but a lot of folks have been given bad directions, so it ends up getting tricky to actually make it happen successfully. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do this so you know every time the easiest way. I've already got 2 eggs plus 1 egg yolk here. I've got an extra little, in this case we'll call it a waste bowl. And then I'm going to throw my eggshell somewhere else in just a sec. So when you crack your egg, you want to crack it on a flat surface. That gives you the least likelihood of some of your eggshell falling apart and getting into the rest of your egg. The other thing we're doing here is we're cracking with a separate bowl first, and then we're adding what we want to keep to our keep bowl. So then if there is an eggshell, it's in this other bowl first, and then we can still transfer what we need over here. So there's 2 ways of doing this. The first is you crack the egg and then you use the eggshell transferring the yolk back and forth in order to get your yolk. That way works pretty well. Sometimes your eggshell will cut the yolk, and then you kind of have a screwed up egg. The other option is, and that's the one I'm going to show you, option 2, because it's the easiest. We crack the egg on the countertop, we throw it into the bowl, and then we literally just use our hands to scoop the egg yolk out, and you'll see how easy it is for the yolk to separate from the white. So we crack this on the countertop. We need a couple cracks. Pop that open. So if we had cracked it too hard on the countertop, we may have accidentally broken our yolk already. And when we popped it out, if we just wanted the yolk, but the yolk was broken, if we went into our main bowl, we wouldn't have any way of separating that anymore. But because we went into this side bowl, I can literally just scoop it with my fingers, kind of pinch your fingers a little bit, and it separates. You saw how that happened. I just squeezed my fingers a little, and it separated the white from the rest of the yolk. Now you could keep that white for making a meringue or something. You could cook it up and give it to your dog or your cat. So we're going to be combining and whipping up some ingredients here. Going to be using a stand mixer. Now you can do this by hand at home with a regular whisk. You could also just use a hand mixer. This part, it's ideal if we get it mixed up enough so that we get to a kind of like a thick and pale consistency. But frankly, if you just do a decent job mixing by hand with a little hand whisk, you'll still get 90% of the outcome. It's just with the extra whisking that we do here and the extra whipping, we get more air into the mixture, so we get a lighter, fluffier cake. Your flavor is still going to be great either way. We're just aiming for light fluffiness. Oh, here's a really great tip for you, because this recipe depends on a little bit of precision at the end, just a little bit, don't get scared. It's that when we pour our batter into the ramekins, we want that to be as even as possible across each ramekin, because these only bake for 12 minutes, and we need the inside to basically be raw or uncooked, not fully cooked at least, that's a better way of saying it, and the outside to be cooked enough to hold on to it. So there isn't a huge window for these things to vary, and if one ramekin has significantly more batter in it than another, that one's going to take longer to bake. And it's hard to identify which ones are done early or late. So what you can do, and this is a trick I learned a while ago, and this is really great, when you know you need to measure something later on, get out a kitchen scale and measure the vessel you know things are going to be made in. So I'm going to be using this bowl, so I'm going to measure how much this bowl weighs. Going to do it in grams, a little more specific. So zeroed out. So this bowl is 779 grams. I'm going to write that down on a sheet of paper, because what that means is I can weigh this whole thing later with all the batter inside of it, subtract 779 grams from it, and I know exactly how much batter I have. I can divide that by 4, and then that's how much I need to put into each ramekin. So that just helps us with a little bit of precision later on, so that these things bake even more evenly. If you don't have a scale, just eyeball it. It's fine. They'll still turn out pretty good. Okay, back to the stand mixer. Whisk attachment, you can use the beater as well. The whisk is just going to help us out a little bit more here. So we're going to take our 4 eggs, a 1/4 cup of sugar, and a pinch of salt. So there is still 2 tablespoons of flour. We don't use that yet. That's for later. So 1/4 cup of sugar. Dump that right in. And then just a pinch of salt. I'm going to show you how little that is. If you can see that. There's not much there. It's just a pinch. We don't need a lot. The salt is there to bring out the flavor. We don't need it to taste salty. Drop this down. Start it low so things mix a little bit. And then we want to whip it up to a fairly high speed. So on my stand mixer, I'm at about a 7. And we're just going to keep doing this until it becomes thick and pale. And again, if you don't have a hand mixer, if you don't have a stand mixer, you're just whisking this by hand, you could go nuts and get thick and pale by hand. It's going to be a great forearm workout. If you don't want to take it that far, where we're at already, you can see it's already gotten a little paler. This is fine. You could stop here and be fine. You just won't have as much volume, expansion, and lift in the chocolate lava cake in the final product. So we're almost there. The color's starting to get pale. It's definitely getting a lot thicker. We can see the bubbles building up inside of this mixture. Okay, so this is about right. It's gotten pretty pale. It's nowhere near as yellow as it was when we first threw our eggs in. And it's got a good amount of air added to it. So let's pop this open. Remove your whisk. So we've got this. Our chocolate should have melted up nicely now. Yeah, the rest of our butter totally melted here. And if you want to make sure this is really homogeneous, nice and even, just take a little whisk out and whisk that up real quick. We're going to whisk in a figure 8 pattern. If you need to, go around the outside real quick. But a figure 8 will get you a better mix than just going in circles. Going in circles won't really do a whole lot for you. Figure 8 will really get everything mixed up. Okay, so our chocolate's ready. So now we want our 2 tablespoons of flour. We've got this mixture here. We can actually take this off the stand mixer. We are done with the mixer. And we're going to combine our flour and our chocolate here to mix everything up. And what we're going to do is we're going to do something called folding, which is a very gentle way of incorporating all of your ingredients together. I'm going to just dust my flour in first. And then we're going to get our chocolate mixture in here. You want to get as much of this out as you can. So, whisks aren't all that great at getting things out of bowls. One of the tools I really love having on hand. Oop, making a mess. One of the tools I really love having on hand is something called a bowl scraper. They look like this. They're dirt cheap. It's like, I think you get a pack of 4 for like $4. What's great is they've got flexible ones like this, and it's curved to kind of fit the shape of a bowl. So you can flex it a little to really fit into the curve. And yeah, that's a good angle. So you can see how much of the chocolate I actually get with this, which is much more efficient than a spatula, especially more efficient than a whisk. So this just gets us all that yummy, buttery chocolate. So I'm going to be folding all these ingredients. And what that means is I'm gently going around the outside and through the middle. And around the outside and through the middle. And being gentle here is very important because we whip those eggs to create air pockets so that we get some nice growth in our chocolate lava cakes when they bake. If we were just whacking around with our spatula or with a whisk, we'd end up knocking all that air out and we wouldn't get all that rise. Because you'll notice in the ingredients here, we don't have baking powder, we don't have baking soda, we don't have anything in here to give us rise other than the air that we whipped into those eggs. So just be patient, take your time. We are going until we have a pretty homogeneous color here. We don't have streaks of chocolate anymore. And we don't run into little packets, or pockets rather, of flour. And if it helps, just keep repeating yourself around the outside and through the middle. Around the outside and through the middle. Around the outside, through the middle. Cool. So this is now even. This is now ready to go into our ramekins. It's going to go into our ramekins. Remember, we weighed our vessel before. So what we're going to do, weigh it again, subtract the weight of our vessel, so we know how much of the batter we actually have. Some folks, when they do this recipe, they know, because they've done it so many times, they know exactly how much this will yield for them. And when they measure all the ingredients at the beginning with weight, oh wait, we zero that out. Okay, 1,253 minus 779. Totally okay to bring your phone out for math. So we've got 474 grams. So we're aiming for about 118 grams per ramekin. So we throw these on our scale, zero that out. Now we can just aim for that 118 number and get as close as possible. Ooh, okay, barely overshot it, but I think we'll be okay. So that's the first one. Give it a little shake to even it out. Set it on your pan. Next up, zero it out in case they weigh a little bit differently. And go for 118 again. Boom. There we go. 118 on ramekin number 2. There we go. Ramekin number 2. Give it a little shake to even it out. I don't think I did it on the second one. Now, ramekin number 4. So this is where if we don't get to that 118 number, we'll start pulling out our bowl scraper to really make sure we get everything. Oh, got to zero it out. Really make sure we get everything out of our batter here. 106. So that's pretty close. What we could do, since we know that first one was a little high, let's get a little spoon and even things out just a little bit. Because this is pretty close. We want it to just be a little bit closer if we can get it. To get these all pretty level with each other. There we go. So it's not perfect, but what you're going to see in the final product is actually the bottom and the sides. So these are all prepped. These will now go into the oven for 12 minutes, just like this. At about 12 minutes, and it may take upwards of 15, but usually about 12 is right. At 12 minutes, we take these out. We let them sit in the ramekins for another 1 minute because there's enough heat in here, they're going to keep cooking, but we don't want the heat from the oven imparting extra heat at that point. Then, and I'm going to walk you through this, we're going to invert these onto some plates, let them set for a few seconds, then remove this and see our beautiful chocolate lava cakes. So, into the oven these go, again 450 for 12 minutes. Okay, our 12-minute timer just went off, so we're going to get those out of the oven. I'm going to show you what they look like. So you can see they evened out pretty well, got fairly smooth. We're going to let these sit for 1 minute. So I'm just going to set my little cheapo timer to 1 minute. 1 minute, they're going to sit in these. And so what we're looking for here is, see the center here? Let me get in real nice and close for you. The center here looks like it's still a little underdone, but the outer edges are looking pretty good. They're puffed up. They're starting to angle a little bit from the edges, and you can especially see on this one right here that it's starting to just pull away from the edges just the tiniest bit, and that's what we're going for here. That's the sign that the outside is baked and the inside is just a little undone, so they're going to flow really nicely. Now, if you're planning to serve this with ice cream, we've got 15 seconds. Now's the perfect time. Actually, no, get your plates out right now. So I'm just going to use 4 big plates because that's what I got right now. All right, that's our 1 minute timer. Now, we don't want to leave these in too long because these ramekins still have a lot of heat. So we don't want that to cook the outside too long. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be inverting these ramekins onto these plates. Easiest way to do that is you're going to take your plate upside down, hold the ramekin underneath, flip it over, let it sit like that for about 10 seconds, and then you can remove, actually, another little insurance move you can do. If you're really nervous, we'll do this on the first one and then not on the second one and see how they turn out. You can slice around the outside of your chocolate lava cake just to really separate it. Now these feel like they're coming apart pretty easily, so I think I can do it without the knife. So be very careful. These are still going to be very hot. Pick it up gently, hold it underneath. You're probably going to be using a smaller plate, but that's okay. Flip it over and then give that about 10 seconds before you remove the ramekin so that it releases itself, ideally. It's also a really great trick you can use if you've got a cake that seems to stick in the pan, it's just not coming out. Put your cake on an inverted vessel, pan, a cutting board, whatever. Flip it upside down and just let gravity gently do the work for you. It doesn't always work, but if your cake was already a lost cause because it wasn't coming out, that might be the thing that solves your problem for you. Let's see how we did. So let's see, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, I believe. So let's start with the first one. Beautiful. Came right out. Nothing really sticking on the inside there. That is exactly what we wanted. Look at those. Those are gorgeous. You want to serve these as quickly as possible because you still want the inside to be really hot and flowy and runny. You can serve this with whipped cream. You can use a chocolate sauce. You can use a caramel sauce. You can use a little bit of ice cream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack one of these open for you so you can see it flowing out. And you can see the molten inside, and then I'm going to serve up some ice cream with these bad boys. Cuts beautifully. There we go. See? That's what we want. See that gooiness flowing right out from the center? That is a chocolate lava cake. Baked on the outside, just barely. Flowing on the inside. It's like it's full of a little bit of lava. I've got a little ice cream here I'm going to serve up. Serve that on top. The chocolate lava cake is still nice and warm, so your ice cream is going to melt a little bit, and then ideally when folks cut into this, they cut through the ice cream into the hot lava cake. They open it up, they see that lava flow out beautifully, and they get to enjoy the sweetness of the ice cream with the really rich chocolate of your chocolate lava cake. I mentioned earlier how we were going to dust these with cocoa powder. You can do it before or after adding the ice cream. There we go. Now, your chocolate lava cakes are done.